Right, everybody. Hi, my name is Diana Walker. I've been working part-time on behalf of the Trust since 2021, and we'll go through in a moment about what we're talking about when we say the Trust. But working part-time with them since 2021, the Trust is a new organisation, it's a new charitable organisation that's there in order to manage and maintain the Ebbsfleet Garden City. And I have been getting involved in their communication, so such as website development, helping to put together anything that's needed in order to get the allotment plots ready for residents to be able to license, and also the community gardening. So it's a lot of the back office stuff I tend to do. I'm working on the policies and procedures, the health and safety rules, the tenancy agreements that will be drawn up, the social media, and I'll also work closely with the trustees to ensure that they understand anything that's being raised by residents or community groups go back to the trustees to make the decisions necessary. And yeah, so that's my background and that's what I get to do. I'll hand over to Iona.
Thanks, Di. Hi, everyone. My name's Iona O'Carroll, and I also work for the Trust, and I am doing some community development and community engagement work. So specifically working with the Community Garden and Allotment Project to think about how we can involve residents and really create a space that people feel welcome to come and use, and consider different ways that we can work with community organisations and schools, churches, different groups that operate in Ebbsfleet, particularly around the community gardens, which is kind of the area of interest for me, and that's my background is around community development. So I've got lots of experience in setting up new community groups and initiatives, particularly with health focus, so working to reduce health inequalities and how we can bring systems together. So I'm originally a social worker. So yeah, I'm a real people person. So hopefully I'll get to meet lots of you during this process.
Thank you. Okay, so this evening what we're going to do is just spend a couple of minutes talking about the Trust. What do we mean when we say the Trust? Because that's who we're going to be referencing throughout this evening. And also how that's different to the Ebbsfleet Development Corporation. Some of you may or may not have heard of that. But then we'll move on to the bulk of it. The presentation will be talking about what we mean by a community garden and allotments, what's going to be provided, when will they be ready. We'll then go on to talk about how they're going to be managed, because ideally, in the short term, they'll be managed by the Trust. But, this is a resident and a community facility. So really, we want to have the residents and the community groups running this as much as possible, as soon as possible. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the application process in order to be able to lease an allotment and or use the community gardens. We'll let you know what's next and what to expect after this presentation. And then we'll open up to questions. And that's going to be your chance to just raise any questions that you've got to understand things a little better. And as I've said, where we don't have an answer, we will make a note of it and come back to you. Thank you, Iona. Okay, so the Ebbsfleet Garden City, obviously you're aware of what that is. It's a development. The intention is to build up to about 50 houses. There'll be 7 city parks, lots of open green spaces, of which the community gardens and the allotments are part of it. So the community garden is going to be, wildflower orchards, fruiting trees, green hedges, so lots of green space for people to relax in. We'll talk about that a little later on. And then there'll also be a series of community buildings that are part of the development. And those community buildings are going to provide health facilities, leisure facilities, education campuses, arts and culture, places to have workshops, community spaces where there can be sports facilities, community meetings, workshops, community groups coming together. You may have somebody that wants to set up weekly sessions for something. That's what those facilities are going to be. So the Ebbsfleet Development Corporation, EDC, was created in 2015 in order to ensure that all of these plans to build this garden city progress as smoothly and as speedily as possible, because these things can take a very long time if you don't have a driving force behind it. So the EDC was created in order to ensure the garden city was developed, and they're also put in charge of all of the planning for the whole of the Ebbsfleet area. So even for houses that are already there, they fall within the UDC to look at the planning intervention or planning rules across the garden city, and the wider community of Ebbsfleet follow the same requirements. But once it's built, the garden city, EDC will close. And so then you're left with, so who looks after all of these community cities? Who looks after the parks? Who looks after all of these community buildings? And it was decided to create a charitable trust to do that, to be given the objective of managing and maintaining all of the community facilities that are within the garden city in perpetuity, so ongoing, without an end date, to ensure that it's looked after and is made available for residents and community groups. Charitable because they need to ensure that if any money is made, it's plowed straight back into the garden city, not into profits for people. Okay, thanks, Iona. So how will the trust do that? Well, the trust, if you can go to the next slide, please, Iona. The trust is
for some reason
made up of 8 trustees. They are voluntary, so they work. The only money that comes to the trustees are expenses for travel. They give up their time in order to run the trust, and the trust works with a number of people across the garden city. So the trustees are represented. They represent EDC, so there's people on there from EDC. There's people on there, 2 trustees from the local authorities. There's people representing residents, representing churches and community groups, and representing actually also the housing association, because there's so much housing being developed across the garden city, and there will eventually be people on there representing businesses as well. But 8 or 10 or 12 trustees are not a large number of people to represent all of the different communities across Ebbsfleet. So they will work with a number of interested parties or stakeholders. So they will work with another group will be set up, let me make that clear. Another group will be set up to work with the trustees that will have more people from across the community representing the residents and the charities and the education and the local authorities and all the different interested parties. And the trustees will take information and feedback from that group to ensure the way the trust operates and what it delivers is meeting the requirements of the people that live and work within Garden City. And the trust will be put in charge and have transferred over to them all of the community facilities that are being created as part of the Garden City. So that's the green spaces and the buildings. And they will need to ensure that there's a sustainable budget for each of those, they call them assets, but for each of those facilities that's transferred across to the trust will first of all need to ensure that there's a sustainable budget so that they can make sure it's managed and maintained and made usable and made available for the community as the community needs it. And another role that the trust will take on is carrying out placemaking activities. So currently, the EDC have a placemaking team, and they are responsible for ensuring that the Garden City becomes a community. They put on a series of community events, they put on a series of events and activities and things that residents and community groups can take part in, but they also are trying to encourage the residents and community groups to put these things on themselves. So they make available grants that residents and community groups can apply for in order to put on events and activities in the Garden City. And the trust will start to take over some of that grant funding to get involved in those things, because over time, the trust will take on that role. Thank you. So, saying that, the Ebbsfleet Green and the Springhead Park Community Garden and allotments are the first of the facilities that are being made available and being transferred to the ownership of the trust. And once the trust owns them, then they will then be available to license. The allotment plots will be available to license to residents. Okay, so what's being given? Well, we have first of all the Springhead Park Community Garden and allotments. Some of you may have seen work that's being done for this as you cross the bridge. To the left-hand side, as you cross over the Springhead Bridge, then you will see, and there's a lot of building work being done there. Some of it's going to just be general green community space, but a part of it is going to be the allotment plots, and another part of it is going to be the community garden. So you can see that to the right of the plan drawn here is the community garden. You can see the curved pathway there. And the community garden, when we talk about a community garden, we're talking about some raised planter beds that's going to be made available. And it's also going to be a wildflower orchard and some fruiting trees. There's going to be seating there for people. And this is going to be open for anybody within the community to use. It's not gated. It has got hedging around it and fencing and hedging, but it's not gated. To the left, you can see the plots there. If you counted them, you'd see about 15 plots. There's about 12 of 125 meters squared, and then the other 3 are a little bit bigger. This is what's been approved in planning those sizes, but that only gives 15. That's not going to meet the needs. So we, the Trust, fully intend to subdivide those plots to ensure that the maximum number of residents can get a plot that requires them. The size we go down to, it could be 30 meters squared, it could be 40 meters squared, it could be 60 meters squared. We will look at that once we get the applications in and start to get a much better feel of what people are wanting and needing and the numbers we're talking about. The largest one, 300 meters squared, we're intending to keep for the community gardeners to use. So the community gardening will have the raised planter pots and also a large allotment plot to use. The Springhead Park one currently is looking to be completed in May. Once it's completed, then the Trust will do a review and a check to ensure that the developers have provided and done it to spec. And when that's been agreed, then the land will be transferred over to the Trust. And once it's been transferred over, then the Trust is able to issue the tenancy agreements for any allotment plot holders. They're not expecting that to be until early June. So we know that's missing the main planting area. So we're trying to get as many things ready as possible now, so that once we've got the plots given to the Trust, we can move as quickly as possible and get that into the ownership of the allotment plot holders. There are watering points around the site, there's compost bins and seating as well. And for this site, there's 6 designated parking spaces. The allotment plots are in a gated, they're gated and they will be locked by either a key or a key code, which will be given to the allotment plot holders. So that's going to be a secure area, only accessible by the allotment plot holders. Okay, go over to the next one. So here we've got a split green. You can see the plan looks a little bit different. The style is different, and that's because both sites have been developed by 2 different developers, and they've used 2 different companies. So that's why you get a difference in style. But what again you can see here is that there's going to be about 16 plots laid out by the developers, 9 at 60 meters squared and 7 at 125 meters squared. And again, we fully intend to subdivide these plots so that we can have the maximum number of residents having a plot. And again, we will do it based on need. So when the applications come in, we'll see what does it look like for needing. Do we need to go down to 30, 60, 40 meters squared? Ideally, we'd like to work in round numbers, 30 meters squared, 60 meters squared. 125 would be the largest, and we're not don't envisage there be that many of those, but we're open to it. And again, as with Springhead Park, there's the allotment plots are in a secure gated area with a key code. There's 3 parking spaces allocated for Ebbsfleet Green, and both sites have parking for bikes as well. There's a wildflower meadow with some fruiting trees, and the long strip that's got the trees in it is also where the community gardeners will do their planting, because there'll again be some planter beds there. There are 2 watering pots, composting bins, and also both sites have what we call a central facility, and that's where there'll be things like some potting benches and things that the allotment holders can use to do things. We don't yet have a date for Ebbsfleet Green, but we do expect it to be similar to the date for Springhead Park. And this site is allocated at the end of Tickner Drive, so you're going to need to drive through the estate in Ebbsfleet Green in order to get to these plots. Thanks, Iona. Okay, so I'll hand over to Iona now, who will talk a little bit about edible Ebbsfleet.
Thanks, Di. Yeah, so for anyone,
Iona, I think that's better. Can you hear you?
It says I'm not on mute. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, so some of you may have seen the Edible Ebbsfleet logo and sign around the area. This project was an initiative started by EDC. Oh, sorry, EDC, and really it was around the promotion of growing your own food. So the projects, the allotment gardens and community garden project will be part of Edible Ebbsfleet. And really the aim of the initiative is to support and work alongside local residents and groups to develop small scale food growing. And this is we all know the benefits of growing our own food, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. But specifically with this project, we wanted to promote education on the health benefits of eating fresh fruit and veg for both children and adults, encourage residents to get outside, growing, learning new skills and sharing their produce. And this also helps with access to affordable food and removing some of those barriers, I think, which is particularly relevant at the moment with the cost of living crisis and the prices of things going up. So there have been some projects that the schools, so Springhead Park and Ebbsfleet Green School, have been involved with Edible Ebbsfleet, and also Eastgate Church. You may have seen they have a number of planters outside their building with fresh herbs that anyone can come and pick and help themselves. So that's kind of the idea behind Edible Ebbsfleet, and we really wanted to be part of the initiative, just to kind of increase that joint up working approach in the area with already different projects that are going on around food growing and gardening. So we really are kind of our overarching aim, EGCT, is to develop a larger scale community food growing movement, which again I'll talk about in a moment around the benefits of that in terms of health benefits, physical and mental health and well-being. So look out for the logo. You might now see it. If you haven't picked up on it before, you might notice it elsewhere. So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about community gardening, and I've picked this lovely image of bees in the hive because it's one of my little mantras that I live by, where I always say bees need a hive, people need a tribe. Which is something that I really, really believe in. I think coming together and being part of something, not just as an individual, but as a group, can be a really sort of powerful movement. And so community gardening is much more than just gardening. It's all about the community. So for any of you who don't know what a community garden is, it is a group of residents that come together, or local people who volunteer, and any amount of people can be involved in a community gardening project. It's not specific to a number of people, and it's open to everyone. So we really kind of want the community garden to be something that everybody feels able to participate in, regardless of their age or their background or their needs. So the idea again is to offer everybody access to a green space where they can come and relax and be part of nature, and take part in physical activity. People who join the garden and the group can decide how the community gardening group will run. So it's not prescriptive. It's not something that we've made a decision about and we're telling people what to do. The idea is this is a new group that's established by the people who live in the area, who can decide how they want to manage that garden, how they want to run it, what they want to grow, how often they want to meet, how or different groups may run for different people. So maybe that there's something that goes on for children there. It may be that there's something that goes on there for adults. So it's like really diverse space, and also decide what they want to do with the fruits of their labour. So what are the different things they've grown, and how they're going to share that. And the real point of community gardening is it's not about the individual work and what you put in and get out yourself. It's about the real group effort. So everything that is grown is shared. The community garden is really, again, like a being opportunity to have a sort of joint aim as a group to care for the local environment, looking after the soil, the plants, the wildlife that comes in these sorts of spaces, but also beyond that and the initial kind of engaging with the land, also looking after each other and making friendships, and forming those relationships with our neighbours that I think many of us would like to do. And I think lockdown taught us that, and how many people had never spoken to their neighbours before, and in lockdown had a reason to come outside and start making friends. So I think the idea of community gardening is to extend that. So it's not just saying hello to your neighbour, but actually working alongside the people that live in our community. The community garden is safe and welcoming. So we really want to celebrate diversity, and the different people that live in our community and get to know each other. And we really promote equality. So if there are barriers for people to join the group, we really want to support them to overcome those barriers, and give people the resources to be part of the community gardening group. The community garden also provides opportunities for learning and upskilling, sharing our knowledge as gardeners, and not just necessarily about gardening, but maybe in a more general approach about how we choose to live our lives. It's a chance to offer peer support and guidance to people, and also a space for community groups to come and offer and run their own workshops and demonstrations, and which ultimately builds confidence for beginners. So the community garden is a space for people who are really, really experienced gardeners, but also anyone who hasn't ever gardened before and may feel a bit overwhelmed about taking on an allotment allotment plot. And hopefully will give you some confidence to maybe potentially go on to having your own allotment in the future. Community garden also demonstrates practical ideas for healthy living, as we said earlier, about the importance of growing food, but also recycling waste and what we do with our compost and how we can feed certain plants and vegetables back into the land, which cultivates it, and cooking and sharing recipes and ideas about different foods that are grown and how we can cook them and share them together. There's also a wider opportunity in terms of the community garden to support food growing initiatives in the community. So some examples of this could be thinking about when it is harvesting time, and there's an abundance of vegetables, the community gardening group would want to donate some of them to a local food bank, or community groups who are going to cook up free meals for everybody to come and access, with all of the waste that people don't want to eat. Like there's so many vegetables that are thrown away all the time because they might just be, people don't have the time to eat them or going on holiday, and actually being able to work in this way as a community, be able to make sure that there is no waste when it comes to food and that it gets to the people who need it the most. The community garden also allows for working in partnership and collaboration with the community and existing groups such as schools, health services. So I don't know if anybody's aware of social prescribing, but most GP surgeries now work alongside social prescribers who, instead of initially working just in the kind of traditional sense of supporting people with their health by prescribing medicine and medication, it's about prescribing in a more holistic approach. So thinking about if somebody has some mobility issues, is there a type of movement that they can do? Can we prescribe someone to go walking on a health walk, or can we prescribe somebody to come and do some gardening at a community garden if they're feeling isolated and lonely and need support with their well-being. So it's the job of social prescribers really is to take a much more therapeutic and holistic approach to supporting people with their health. And the community garden offers a really good opportunity to work alongside health to make that available to everybody who lives in Ebbsfleet. What is an allotment? So an allotment is slightly different to a community garden. It's a plot of land that's rented. One of the things, sorry, I didn't mention about the community garden that was really important is that this is a free space. It's a public space that's open to everybody, which is different to the allotment. So anybody who comes to join the community garden and the community gardening group can do so free of charge. Whereas the allotment is a plot of land that's rented by an individual or a family for growing their own vegetables or flowers. And the idea of an allotment is that it's intended for non-commercial gardening and food growing. So it's not there to kind of grow lots and lots of potatoes and go and sell them at the local market. But it's much more about food that you need for yourself and your friends and family, potentially. Allotments are great because they increase local biodiversity, just the same as community gardens. And they're really good for the environment. And they attract lots of different wildlife. Allotments also provide individuals and families who haven't got access to their own green space, who may not have a garden, who may live in a flat. It gives them a space of their own outdoors to connect with nature and the ground and the soil. Although it's important to point out that allotments are specifically for gardening and growing flowers and food, and unfortunately they can't be rented and used as an extension of a garden. So we won't be allowing things like play equipment on the allotments. An allotment also gives a really good opportunity to garden alongside like-minded people, make friends, get to know your neighbours, and share what you know about gardening and the skills that you have with other people, and learn new things from them too, including swapping vegetables and fruit and herbs and etc. when needed. So what are the benefits of community gardens and allotments? So as I've mentioned some of them already, relevant right now with the cost of living crisis, growing your own food can save you a lot of money. And we all know the increasing prices that vegetables and food have increased to in local supermarkets, and actually doing this can really save a lot of money on your household income. It's also an opportunity to learn about nutrition and the food supply chain, thinking about the pesticides that some food has on it when you buy it in your local supermarket. It's really giving you some control and power and influence about what you're putting in your body, and learning a bit more about where your food comes from, which I think is always really fascinating for children who maybe only see it on their dinner plate and never think about where it originated from. There's a great sense of purpose when you're community gardening and gardening in an allotment, and a sense of belonging with your community, which, as I mentioned earlier, can really reduce isolation and loneliness. There's also some other benefits that we've put here around, the environment and restoring oxygen, and reducing crime, giving people space that they feel they can be a part of, the education. So I also wanted to just talk to you about the benefits in terms of connecting with nature and the outdoors. We all know how good it makes us feel when we spend time outside. And if you've got a job where you are stuck at home, and particularly since lockdown, where people aren't going to workplaces in the same way that they were before, there's a lot more home working or hybrid working, but people are stuck at home and increasingly don't have a reason to go outside very often. So gardening, community gardening and allotments are a great way to just spend more time outside and top up on the vitamin D and spend time in the sunshine, which we all know makes us feel good. I think we're all lacking at this time of year at the moment. There's great health benefits in terms of physical activity and movement. So it is a good form of exercise. When you're bending down and moving around, and just weeding can be, next day you can feel it. But it's also a really, really good form of looking after our mental health and well-being. So I've put an image here about, did you know that soil is an antidepressant? It's a natural antidepressant, which a lot of people aren't aware of. And this is to do with the release of serotonin, which is a mood lifting hormone. And this is found in soil. So when we put our hands in the soil, we do feel, a lot of people report feeling calmer and more connected with the environment and what's around them. And it also gives people a sense of achievement. So planting a seed in the ground and watching it grow into something that you can pick and take home and feed to yourself or your friends or your family is, gives you a real sense of achievement and pride. So I wanted to now talk to you about how we're going to be managing the community gardens and allotment spaces, and our desire to create a new community garden and allotment association. So the initial management of the sites at the moment, as Diana explained earlier, the sites will be handed over by the developers to EGCT, to the trust. So the initial management of the site belongs to EGCT, and they will be giving the space, the community garden space, to the public to use for free, and it will be open for everybody in the community to come and access. In terms of the allotments, there will be a leasing process, so the allotments will be rented at a price to different individuals. So that's how it will begin, but our desire long term isn't to maintain that system. So what we'd really like to do is create a new community garden and an allotment association as soon as possible. And really, we need residents to get on board and want to come and join within that process in order to make that happen. And so the idea will be that the Community Garden Allotment Association will then take over the lease of the entire site at both Springhead Park and Ebbsfleet Green from EGCT. And the Community Garden Allotment Association will be run by a group of volunteer residents who rent an allotment or are part of the community gardening group in Springhead Park and Ebbsfleet Green. So there'll be two separate allotment associations for both sites. And really, this is a plea and a call to anybody who wants to get involved in creating this new association. We really need you on board in order to make it work. And we want it to be inclusive and as diverse as possible in terms of including people who are renting allotments and part of the community gardens. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that now. So Community Garden and Allotment Association, for anyone who hasn't been part of an association before, who hasn't been involved in setting up one, the idea is that the group will elect, so that's all of the people who are using the allotments and the community gardens, will elect a committee, and they will need a chairperson, a secretary, and a treasurer. People can put themselves forward for those roles. The Community Garden and Allotment Association will then need to agree a constitution, which is basically the aims of the association and what they want to achieve, and how regularly they're going to meet. And I think in the initial stages of creating association, the meetings will need to be fairly regularly, but as time goes on, it will be up to the association and the members of the association to decide how often they want to meet. We, as the trust, will be providing support in order to for the association to develop, and whatever residents feel they need in order to make this happen, we want to be able to support them with and provide solutions. So this isn't a process that we're expecting you to do alone, but we can't do it without you. So the responsibilities of the Community Garden and Allotment Association include arranging tenancy agreements. So as mentioned previously, currently the arrangement will be for allotment users to to sign a tenancy agreement with the trust. That responsibility will then go over to the Community Garden and the Allotment Association. We will be the Allotment Association will be collecting the payments for the allotments and reinvesting the revenue back into things like the maintenance of fences or other communal areas in the allotments and the community gardens, repairs as and when they arise, and capital investment. So that's things, if there are particular needs that both the allotment plot holders and community gardeners feel they really need in order to progress the sites, there will be money through the generation of the revenue to purchase items for the community. The other kind of core responsibility of the association will be ensuring plot holders and community gardeners and the different groups that use this space adhere to the site rules and policies. So particularly around health and safety. If there are community gardening groups that are running activities and workshops with children or vulnerable people, there will need to be safeguarding measures in place and that kind of thing. And really, the community garden and allotment association is there to work together for a shared vision. And what we really want to encourage is that this isn't a separate association between the allotment holders and the community gardeners, but something that people who are involved in both different sides of the gardening are involved, heavily involved with and have their voices heard. And although groups and people will be using the spaces in a slightly different way, the kind of vision of what we want to achieve is the same. And essentially the gardening, everyone's going to be growing. So yeah, important to remember, I think, is that we really want this to be cohesive and inclusive for everybody. So the application process for the allotments. So the priority for the allotments in Springhead Park and Ebbsfleet Green are going to the residents in those areas. So if you are a resident of either of those areas, you will be given priority of an allotment. We haven't, depending on the need and how many applications we receive, we would then consider opening up priority for the allotments to people who live in the wider area. But initially, we're giving priority to the residents in those two areas. As I mentioned before, with the community gardens, they are open to everybody, so there won't be priority given. But for the allotments, we've made the decision to do it that way. So we will be releasing an application form, the trust will, and which we will send to everybody on this call, and we will also be putting it on our website. The application form will need to be submitted and specify which site you would prefer and the size of the plot required. So as Di mentioned earlier, there's a range of different size plots available, but what we really want to ensure is that everybody has an opportunity to have an allotment if possible. And so depending on the demand and how many people apply, we will be dividing up those plot sizes to ensure that as many people can have access to that space as possible. But it may be that you have a preference in terms of what you feel you can take on in terms of an allotment. So it might be that you want to start at 30 square meters, which is a good size for a beginner. It's not too daunting. There's still plenty of space to grow salad and vegetables, but it's more easier to maintain and manage. And it might be that you want a slightly larger plot if you're a more experienced gardener and you want to really get going with that. So we're asking people to specify what size plot they'd like. We're not guaranteeing that you'll get that plot. As I said, it all depends on how many applications we receive. Then after the application is approved, you will be asked to have you'll be offered a site visit where you can come down and see the allotment plots and meet one of the members of the trust who will come and show you around and sign a tenancy agreement. And the tenancy agreement will really kind of include some policies and some rules of the site. So that's a really important element for you to understand and for us to communicate with you. Following that, you'll then make a payment and we've put receive key here, but as Di mentioned, it potentially will be a combination lock, just to avoid the loss of keys and having to make lots of new ones cut when things happen. So once you've gone through that process, you'll be able to start gardening. And we really want to make the process as simple and as quick as possible to get you to be able to get to your allotment as quickly as possible.
Hello.
Sorry, is there going to be a time for us to ask some questions at the end?
Yes, yeah, there'll be a time. We're nearly there, and then we'll have some space for lots of questions. So yeah, please take a note of any questions you've got.
Thank you.
So the application process for the community gardens is slightly different. So there isn't an application form as it stands. You just need to register your interest on our website, or if you have already registered your interest and you've had an email from me or Di, then you don't need to do anything else. We've got your details noted. I'm going to be contacting all of the people who have registered interest in the community gardens in the next couple of weeks, and really the idea is to find a time that's convenient for as many people as possible to have a face-to-face meeting. So I'll be sending out a doodle poll for anyone who's who has used that before, so it just indicates lots of different options for dates and times, and the idea of coming together as a group is really to kind of identify the key roles of the community gardening group, what the responsibilities of the group will be, what resources are available, and what resources we may need to consider in order to form a new group, and the leadership, so who's going to be doing what. And again, we really haven't got set ideas about the community gardening group and what it looks like. We really want that to be decided by residents and anyone who's interested in coming along to that. We really need everybody, you know, all the different skills and experience they bring to make that group a success. So we have had quite a lot of interest in the community gardening group, which is really exciting. And I think it's a real opportunity to shape and influence a new community setting, right from the ground up and from the grassroots, so to speak. So once we've had that meeting and we've identified how often people want to meet, then people will be able to start gardening together. As Guy mentioned earlier with the community gardening group, the space is open to the public and it's raised beds and planters. So there's, I think, 16 raised planters in Springhead Park and 8 in Ebbsfleet Green. And so it may be that there are different groups that want to take ownership of different planters. So it may be that there's a community group already established that wants to take on one of those planters to do some gardening, or it may be that the whole, you know, residents come together and want to do something on a larger scale. So we have made the decision at the trust to hold back one of the allotment spaces in Springhead Park, which is one of the larger allotment plots, which we are going to hold back for the community gardening group. So they've also got a space in the ground as well as the raised beds. And the community gardens are open to everyone in the Garden City, but also beyond that in Northfleet and Swanscombe. So yeah, it's much easier to get involved in the community gardens than if you haven't been able to have an allotment, or if you don't wish to have an allotment. So Di, would you like to talk through the allotment prices?
Yes, okay, thank you, Iona. Okay, so price-wise, what are we looking at? Well, the trust did some research, some analysis of the prices for allotment plots around England, around the UK actually, looking at council-run allotments and also private allotments. This one, the one by the trust, would be classed as a private one. The council run allotments tend to be subsidised, so those prices do come out as lower. They're lower than the prices we've got here, but the prices here tend to be lower than many of the private ones around the UK. So the trust have really tried to kind of go that middle ground of what can they charge in order to try and cover the costs and still make it as affordable as possible. So we've ended up at 50 pence per square metre. For those of you that are used to allotments and work in rods, we've put down what that means in a rod size. So that means if you're starting with a relatively smallish plot of 40 square metres, that's £20 a year. If you're looking at 30 square metres, it's £15 a year. Up to £62.50 for the slightly larger ones of 125 square metres. And in order to keep the prices as low as possible, then we need to keep the admin as low as possible. So what we'd be looking at is people pay this as an annual fee. If need be, they can pay, split it over 2 payments, but that's going to be it, because the more multiple payments we have, the more admin that brings, and that increases the cost. And we're trying to keep the cost as low as possible. Another thing we're looking at to try and keep the admin costs down is the renewal for the license for your tenancy agreement will be every 12 months, and everybody will be renewed on the same date. So we'll just have a date of when we start, and then every year that's when the renewals will come through. Again, keep the admin prices down in order to keep the costs down. And then that will keep the license fee down as much as possible. Okay, you can go to the next one, please, Iona. And then, as we've spoken to already, there'll be an application form which we'll be sending out to you, asking for name and contact details. You will need to provide a copy of your proof of address, and there will be a list of various sizes, and you can tick there what you would prefer, your first and second choice. Plots can be licensed to an individual family, but you may have a group of you may have 3 different people, living in 3 different homes that choose to come together to do a plot. And that's absolutely fine as well. You just need to have the name and address of the one applicant who would be classed as the one that we would interact with, and we need their proof of address. But for the others, as long as we've got the names, that would be fine. Thanks, Iona. Okay, so what we'll be looking at is sometime towards the end of this month, we'll send out an application form, and we will send it out to everybody that has registered an interest on the website. So it's not just the people on the call, it will be everybody that we've got in our database of a waiting list. They'll be sent the application form. I've put down the end of April as when we'll close applicants, because at some point we're going to need to process what we're getting in. If we find, based on the number of application forms, that actually there's still going to be plots left, we would extend the application open submission date. So we're just going to play that by ear, but when we send it out, we'll be saying to everybody, make sure you get it in by the end of April, and that's at that point we'll be processing what you get. And we will be coming back to people in May to say, based on what we've had come in, this is the size plot that you will be getting on the site. And we've been looking to sign tenancy agreements in June. Those dates are very, very dependent on when the developers have completed the landscaping, when we've been able to have a check to make sure it meets all of the specifications that they were told in planning they had to do, and how long it takes to transfer it from the ownership of the developers to the trust. We've got these solicitors ready and waiting to do that, so that we can move as quickly as possible. Because we are losing, we're very aware of how much the beginning of the growing season is going to lose. We are going to try and move this as quickly as we can, but it is going to be a process of what we can do. We can't sign a tenancy agreement until the trust owns the land, because we really can't do that. And we put there March 2024. We're hoping by then we'd love to have both associations set up, one for each site, because setting it up not only means ensuring you've got, treasurers and chairperson and secretary and your constitution, but it also means having a bank account open for the association. And as Iona has said, the trust will give as much help as possible in order to get these set up. We'll be helping with drafting the constitutions, we'll be helping with the meetings and how to run them, we'll be helping with what needs to be done to open a bank account, provide as much support as we can to help people to go through this process. The information from this session, this PowerPoint, will be put onto the website and made available to people, and when we've done that, we will let you know. So we're going to open up to questions now, but just drawing your attention to, on the left-hand side, you can see there they're actually signs. We've started to create the signs that will be put up at the opening of the community gardens and the allotments. So you can see there's one being created for Springhead Park and one for Ebbsfleet Green, with the Ebbsfleet logo, as Iona mentioned, just to show you what you will eventually see on the road. Anyway, I'd like to open up to questions now, please, so you can all unmute, and we'll take it from there. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us in the evening, taking your time in the evening to join us and get an update on this information. As I've said, we will get this presentation out on our website and let you know so that you can see what was said. And I'll just hand over to Iona to say goodnight.
Yes, thank you everyone for spending your evening with us. And yeah, sorry we ran over a little bit, but hopefully it was worth your time coming this evening. So look forward to hopefully working with some of you on the community gardens.
Yeah. Thank you all. Good night.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.